I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And now, thank you very much for coming up.
All right. Well, to honor my roots, buenas noches, President Logan, Vice President Rhodey, Superintendent Thompson, and members of the board. Hey, I told you I was going to add Spanish to it. Yeah, I will tell you that my inner nerd is geeking out right now. I'm having withdrawals because tonight's the night when the tickets for the new Star Wars movie go on sale. And so if I kick David under the table to make him go faster so I can get those tickets.
Monday Night Football.
Here you go. Well, no, honestly, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to be here in front of you. I do want to acknowledge our speakers from earlier this evening, Haley, Darrell, and Lori. Thank you guys very much for your thoughtful words and comments. We certainly appreciate you guys and your insight. Tonight's presentation will provide you an overview of the program, highlights of new initiatives, and will also provide you information on community eligibility provision, or CEP as it is known, although I'm looking for Ernestine to maybe give us another name for it here pretty soon. It's going to be interesting because we're going to begin talking a little bit more about, again, nutrition services and the great work that they do. Often there are many stories in the media about lunch programs, and these stories sometimes are incorrectly tied to our district and the work that we do. I do want to make clear that students in our district have access to school meals, regardless of the balances on their account. We are very direct and honest about that. We are feeding students, and our overall participation in many ways shows it.
Would you slow down and say that again? Because what you just said is real important, and I want it said so the public can understand it about the kids in our district.
I won't use Spanish. No, I want to make clear that students in our district have access to meals regardless of what balance they have on their account. And we've, as a district, made that decision a few years ago. And so none of our kids, no kids are food is not being withheld from students because they can or cannot pay. And that's the reality of the program that we operate. As I mentioned earlier, David and his team do a great job and work tirelessly to increase access to quality of food to many of our students. So food shaming or serving alternative meals for low balances or negative balances is not a practice in the Wichita Public Schools. So with that said, in the segue, David and I will be running you through a presentation that gives you that overview of the Nutrition Services Department, and then we'll segue into CEP. So, Mr. Paul?
Thank you, Fabian. Good evening, everybody. Let's go to the first slide, Fabian. Just wanted to take a real quick minute to recognize a dedicated group of individuals, our nutrition services supervisor team. You met, 1, 2, 3 of them this evening. So pictured top row, left to right, Karen Hansen, supervisor of technology and finance, which includes all the free and reduced processing functions. You met Jeff and Adria this evening. Jeff oversees secondary programs, Adria elementary programs. And then on the bottom row, you met Grace, assistant director, earlier this evening, oversees the K-8 schools, the special schools, as our liaison with the purchasing department, and so much more. Next is Chris Miller. He's the supervisor for the Food Production Center. And then Richard Johnson, the supervisor for warehouse and distribution. Then I wanted to just show you a few pictures real quick of our extended team. Our dedicated staff arrives to work as early as 4 o'clock in the morning to provide approximately 14,600 breakfasts, 31,000 lunches, and 2,000 suppers each day. Did you know that the Food Production Center was built in the mid-'70s to accommodate preparation for 13,000 to 15,000 meals per day? Now we're close to 50,000 a day in basically the same space. So top to bottom, right to left, you have some supervisors and their assistants, the warehouse and delivery staff, hot production, distribution. And then on the next page, our cold production staff, custodial, special diets, and main office. And I'm showing you this because this is only about 100 people of the approximate 425 staff members department-wide. The rest are school-based. So all these folks work in the Student Services Center. Just wanted to share with you a little bit of data. This infographic shows how many meals we served this past school year. When you add in our at-risk after-school supper meals, nutrition services served over 8.1 million meals last year. So besides participating in the national school lunch and breakfast programs, USD 259 also participates in the at-risk after-school supper program or the super snack program at 65 sites, a pre-K snack program at about 45 sites, and the fresh fruit and vegetable program at 32 elementary schools. Not to mention the summer food program that we operated this past year at 65 sites, our brand new world record. And Dr. Irving presented to you on the summer programs and the summer food service program a few weeks ago and did a stellar job, thank you. So we won't be speaking about that tonight. So we decided to transition an after-school snack program, which is 2 components, 2 food items, to the after-school at-risk supper program, 5 components, because we really thought that there was a need in the community, and we know that there are certainly some kiddos who go home and may not have access to the food that we all might have access to, and so we thought it was really important to expand that and give them a more substantial meal before they left for home at the end of the day. So did you know that all the food programs and nutrition services have different regulations, and many are reimbursed at different rates? It's one of the most highly regulated industries in the whole country.
So you have to be pretty good at math.
Or you have to know how to find stuff. Because I used to be able to commit all this to memory. Those days are long gone, ever since we took over CACFP.
Before you leave this slide, I see you turning. I'd like for you to go back. I just think that the board may not know about the fruit and vegetable program that
Okay.
you have.
That is a separate grant, so schools will apply for it, and most of it's kind of coordinated. That component is coordinated by Diane Smith, who oversees the PE teachers. So each school will submit an application. I review those, sign. Dr. Thompson reviews those, signs. They get sent to KSDE, and KSDE will select schools throughout the state based on how much money is available for those programs. And so typically we submit 35 to 40 applications, and in the 30 range is what we end up having. So we have to have a free and reduced percentage that is over 50%. And so a lot of our schools get selected for the program, and it is great. It is one of the coolest things that we do. Some of you may remember from the last time I presented on Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program that we give these kids some exotic foods that many of us don't eat ever, let alone. So our calendar is really great. Richard and his staff oversees that menuing and the ordering of that product, and there's a lot of coordination with our produce vendor to make sure that we can get these foods in from all over the world for our kids to sample.
How often a
Does
week
that-
Does that help?
The great part about the program, twice a week, they receive a fruit or a vegetable, depending on. And the great part is it really ties the food to the academic side. So you see a lot of really cool things happening in our schools, anything from a world map and the school's plot throughout the year where the fruits or vegetables that they're coming in from. So it's a really good way for them to integrate food into the curriculum and the work that they're doing in the classroom.
And we provide all the schools with some announcement material about the fruit and vegetable featured this week in school. And so kids can learn about the genus and the species and where it's from and the growing periods and all that stuff. So it's really cool.
And then twice a year, we pick a couple of those schools to do a fruits and vegetable identification contest. So when you see us dressed like fools,
Banana
or Banana Boy, or Kernel Corn, or the Big Apple, or an awesome avocado in the back. That is our way to kind of go out and interact with students as part of this food and vegetable contest. It's really, really cool and a lot of fun for our schools.
Does that help, Dr. Thompson?
Yes, because some of the board members were asking me, what is that? So I just wanted to make sure they were aware of what was happening.
Okay.
Thank
Just
you.
a totally separate program, and that we actually serve that generally, depending on the school, but after breakfast, before lunch, or sometime after lunch. So it cannot be served in, conjunction with another school meal.
But it's only elementary?
Only elementaries can participate in the program. So next, we have some points of pride. Secondary renovations. We continue to make our cafeterias nicer environments for our student. We want to create the exceptional dining atmosphere for our students. And so in the past 5 years, we've renovated 16 out of 23 secondary schools. It is said that by having such serene and wonderful environments that it cuts down on discipline, and it really makes it a lot more enjoyable for kids. So I have a couple before pictures of Northwest, and I tried to duplicate those on the next slide. Same angles as far as what we've done. Looks really sharp. Nice job. A couple more pictures of the Northwest renovation, which we did this summer, as well as Truesdale. Don't have any before pictures on Truesdale.
And kids really enjoy these spaces. I mean, it really makes it seem like they're eating at a restaurant. We got the opportunity to visit Truesdale last week, and it's just cool to see the kids as you have the higher stools. It changes the environment, and you see the students also take a greater sense of pride in their cafeterias and in that space too.
Thank you. So the strategic plan, nutrition services is fully engaged in the district's strategic plan. The first bullet on this slide represents the overall department wildly important goal, or WIG, and the following bullets represent some of our WIGs from the various supervisors to support the overall WIG. So our wildly important goal is to increase breakfast participation by 7% and lunch participation by 2% by the end of May 2020. And elementary and secondaries elementaries primarily are trying to work on the ordering from the schools to ensure that all entree choices are available for all students to increase customer satisfaction. Expand breakfast after the bell program and grab-and-go carts, that's elementary and secondary. Expand lunch carts in secondary schools.
Okay, we do have a question. Ron?
It was me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mike? Sure, it's,
I didn't change seats, did I?
no,
Okay.
I
I just-
clicked it too soon.
I wanted to
Sorry.
make a comment on Northwest because that was really a great change. And Mr. Hofer Holman grabbed me the other night and said, hey, we went from 2 lunches to 1, which helps with the planning of the day, and it's probably saving us money too, because we're able to get them through so much quicker and do so. So this stuff is, not only does it look good, but it is helping out the day's classroom too. Then I think that's really important to add into this system.
Thank you. Another part of the sub-plan to reach the bigger goal, it's things that you might not think about, like calibrating our hot boxes so that hot food stays hot and yet doesn't continue to cook once it's plugged in at the school. Increasing our fill rate to our secondary schools from 92 to 98% on all orders submitted by the secondary managers. So you place an order, the goal obviously would be to get to 100% someday, but we want to try to have fill rates of at least 98%. Some things we can't control, like filling the supply chain from our vendors, so that's where the other 2% comes in. decreasing the average processing time for meal benefits applications from 10 days to 5 days. The faster that households are approved for current year meal benefits, the more likely their students will participate in school meal programs. And it's really kind of hard to engage 425 people when you have, in the strategic plan, when you have so many that are 3 hours a day and trying to capture them all. So we all have our own different scorecards for our teams, and so we have scorecards at every school to kind of let them know that, yeah, this is a competition and we want you to win. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about our alternative breakfast programs. We did a pilot last year at 4 elementary schools for breakfast after the bell, so that any student that was late to school for whatever reason could come to the office when they checked in, get their breakfast, and start their day on a good note. And that went quite well. And so at the onset of this current school year, we implemented district-wide in our elementary schools, K-8s, and special schools. In addition, we've had some additional expansion in our secondary schools, starting Heights, Northwest Coleman, Hadley, and Marshall at the onset of the school year, and there's more coming soon. Actually, I think Wilbur is starting this week. So with this information that you see, 90% of all schools have implemented some form of alternative breakfast, and 86.4% have implemented a second chance breakfast. So now we're going to talk to you a little bit about community eligibility provisions, CEP. And I don't know if I can skip slides because you all did a pretty good job getting us started, but I won't, just to make sure we're covering. So we're going to just give you a brief overview, identify some eligibility requirements, talk about the benefits and potential barriers for implementation. So what is CEP? The community eligibility provision is a non-pricing meal service option for schools and school districts in low-income areas. CEP allows the nation's highest poverty schools and districts to serve breakfast and lunch at no cost to all enrolled students without collecting household applications. Schools that adopt the community eligibility provision are reimbursed using a formula based on the percentage of students categorically eligible. So this is not just your free and reduced percentage. This is a deeper dive. Categorically eligible for free meals based on their participation in programs such as SNAP. Heard a lot about SNAP on the news lately, haven't we? The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, as well as other food assistance programs. The percentage is calculated by taking all identified students, including students directly certified through food assistance, and foster children, homeless children, migrant youth, and runaways.
And just for clarification, part of this is what used to be known as food stamps. So basically that's part of the criteria, is those families that would have qualified for what we knew as food stamps.
So since the direct certification kids are such an important part of this factor and accounts for most of the kids that we're talking about here, I wanted to just explain that we get data from KSDE of students that qualify for some type of food assistance. And we merge that with our student database information, and we get a match. And let's say, for purposes of this, that the match is based on student first and last name, date of birth, and street address. So if I live on 121st Street on the KSDE records, but our student database records say 121st Avenue, we might not have a match. So Nutrition Services goes back and tries to do manual matches as well to get as many kids certified as possible through that route. So once that match happens, we generate letters to all those households. Your children listed below all qualify for meal benefits for the current school years. You do not need to fill out a meal application. So that is what we call the direct certification process. Just think of this. Okay? However, the number of direct certifications have been on decline, and with pending legislation may continue to do so. So in 2016-17, we had 22,000 students directly certified for meal benefits. Again, no pre-reduced application. Through August, we are down 15,000 students. So that number has dropped about 7,000 over the course of the last 3 school years. Now we'll pick up some as it goes on, but we've seen drops from 16-17 to 17-80, 6.4%. Next year, drop 8.4%. Current year so far, drop of 14.82%. So it's a little scary. I think we can attribute it to a degree to a strong economy, lower unemployment, and the fact that the state of Kansas might be a little bit ahead of the rest of the nation with regards to having people come off of those programs as soon as possible. So, eligibility requirements. Individual schools or groups of schools must have 40% identified students in the year prior to implementing CEP. So all the data is generated from April 1st. Schools are reimbursed by multiplying that identified student rate by the USDA authorized factor of 1.6 to determine the percentage of meals paid at the free rate.
Again, in order for a school to qualify for CEP, 40% of your students must be receiving some sort of food assistance, whether it's food stamps, whether you're using food stamps, or one of those criteria that SNAP, that David mentioned earlier, in order for them to be able to qualify for CEP.
So the identified student percentage, or ISP, is the percentage of meals in each school or group of schools reimbursed at the free reimbursement rate. Schools with an ISP of at least 62.5% will have all meals reimbursed at the federal free rate. The remaining percentage of meals is reimbursed at the federal paid rate. So right now, so what that means is there won't be any reduced reimbursement at all anymore. So although all students eat free meals, they're not all reimbursed at the free rate. There's no reduced category again. The USDA has the authority to establish that multiplier of anywhere between 1.3 and 1.6%. So we're at the high end of that now. If that drops, there could be some issues. Lunch reimbursement rates. Just so give you an idea, we get $3.67 for a free meal. We get 66.5% for a paid meal. So there's quite a difference in reimbursement. And that difference is supposed to be made up with our lunch prices. And we have to go through this process every year to see how much we should raise our lunch prices, but we prefer not to and can do so because we are okay financially. We're financially stable. Each year of the 4-year cycle, districts or schools may use the ISP from the first year or the current ISP, whichever is higher. So you can look at your ISP for a number of different years and have that be your reimbursement. CP is a 4-year reimbursement option, and eligible districts and individual schools may opt out at any time.
Okay, we do have a question, Mike.
Well, you lost me. I'll be honest with you. Go back one slide, would you please? You're talking about the first paragraph, to serve all low-income children offer a free nutritious school meal to all students.
We wouldn't.
What that says to me is if 40%, knowing what's next on the next slide, if 40% of the children meet the requirements, all the students get free lunch.
You don't charge all students for free lunch, but the amount that you get reimbursed is only for those that fall under that ISP category. So it balances itself out because the meals that you get reimbursed at the $3.60 rate end up making up for those that you're getting reimbursed at the 60-cent rate.
Now, that leads me to my next question. If we're charging more for meals, I mean, at one time, I remember we had to raise our meal rates because we were so far below the USDA level that they made us raise our rates because we were so efficient. And now what you're saying is we need to raise rates so that we can pay for the free lunches out of the paid rates. See, that's what I'm hearing.
No, that's not.
No, not necessarily, Mr. Rhodey. We have to go through that process of determining whether or not we think we should raise prices every year. And then if we think we need to, we bring them to the board. But we'd actually prefer not to raise prices because every time you raise your lunch price 10%, you're going to likely lose 10% of your customers, at least temporarily, which we don't want to do.
Right, and that brings me to my next question. You talked about if the income goes up and they come off assistance in the next slide, they're no longer eligible for the free lunch. Am I stating that correctly? I mean, I'm asking, I'm trying to make sure I got it in my brain correctly.
If the number
here.
of those kids falls below the 40%, then yes.
We kind of go back to the free and reduced system? Is that if we go to below 40?
Yeah. But
Yes,
again,
sir.
that's after 4 years.
So what happens to that group of kids, that 10 or 15% that you're talking about? What happens to those kids that can't afford to pay for the lunch but can't get it free anymore because of the process?
You lost me. I'm sorry. So you mean the kids that fall off of that?
Well,
that
go to
the
the next
assistance?
slide.
Okay.
You're using an opportunity of 40% for the ISP, and say that drops to 30%.
Okay.
Now they're we're back to the free and reduced system.
And we would go back to that free and reduced system at that point.
Right, but if we're at 30%, that means there's a 10% group that could be in limbo, that wouldn't be eligible for a reduced or free lunch because they're off of food stamps, or their parents are making a little bit more because of inflation.
That would hold true even now under our current system, because we directly certify them, they get those free meals. So that could happen at any point. So if their income goes up, then they would have to pay for their meals at that point.
Or if they weren't matched on the direct certification list that match that I was
But
talking
what
about.
happens to the 10% if they can't pay for their lunches? Because, my pockets are empty. I paid my utility bills and my rent, and I don't have anything left.
That's
That's life, it happens.
Okay.
And again, it's no different than under our current system. It's kind of an all or nothing. So if
Yeah.
the school doesn't qualify, then we move out of CEP altogether, and then you would go back to the traditional system that we know.
Now, my last question, and you've done a great job of answering my tough questions.
It's a
And
complicated
They're not
topic.
tough
so-
because they're just me. You talked about funding on this slide, and you talked about how we get reimbursed one amount and one amount. And you made the comment that because we have the money to sustain it, we're sustaining it. What happens if we don't have the money to sustain this? What if we came back to you guys and said, you got to cut 20% out of your budget next year? What are you going to do? What happens?
We would need to look at a variety of options, whether that would mean increasing prices or looking at the produce that we buy and figuring out ways to cut corners in some ways. We would have to look at a variety of factors at that point. But again, what the program is bringing in right now is enough for it to pay for all of its current costs.
Okay,
Yeah,
there you go. That's what I wanted to hear.
yeah, it is.
And I agree, a full tummy and a child means they're going to have the opportunity to learn more, and we need to do that. And that's important to me, that we're feeding our kids. But I was starting to hear numbers not match up, and where it was costing us money to feed lunches, And how are we getting that back? And, you know, I was worried that you were gonna say the word grant, because if a grant runs out, what are we gonna do?
No, no.
And that scares me too, because then we can't sustain it.
Yeah, no, the program in itself right now pays for itself, and as a matter of fact, there is a policy right now that states that you can't go in the red, correct?
Correct. You cannot support us, is your policy. And so our reimbursement rates go up every year. So the cost of food goes up, the cost of electricity goes up, the cost of gas goes up, the cost of labor goes up. Everyone got a nice raise. And so our reimbursement rates go up too. And so we factor in all those things when we decide whether or not we think we need to do a price increase. And we still have a lot of those efficiencies, and we don't want to pass along anything to our children unless we feel like we absolutely need to.
Remember, the nutrition services program and their budget is self-sustaining. And so
Right.
because they've been so efficient with their money is the reason why we're able to do some of the projects like the cafeteria renovations and
Right.
some of those pieces, because we reinvest back into nutrition services, and the cafeterias is one of those allowable expenses that we're allowed to do.
And that's fantastic. It just, I wanted to make sure that I had in my mind that we were meeting funding levels, that we weren't going into the red, because we can't go in the red. Susan won't let us. She's pretty clear about that.
And again, that is part of like and we need to be methodical about CEP, because if we don't do this right, we could get to that point in terms of its impact to even the nutrition services budget also.
Let me ask you one more hard question. How many more meals you talked about the building was built way back before Alicia was born.
That's a magic
Maybe,
question.
I don't know.
We could make 13,000, we were built for
before
13,000
I was
meals a
born.
day, and now we're putting out 50.
Close.
How many can we put out? What's the
That's a
end?
great question.
I mean, are we coming pretty close to the end of the point where we're gonna have to add a building?
If you've been out there in the middle of everyone working at 10 a.m.,
Yep.
you see
Or
tight
6.
quarters.
Come at 6.
When everyone is working, and it's a tight space, and you know, if we increase production or the need for production much more, we are looking at running the risk of potential accidents, because they are
Right.
working on such close quarters. So I think we need to be cognizant of that and keep an eye on that.
People are getting hurt, and no one likes that feeling when someone goes home hurt at the end of the day because of it's their job. And so it's tight. So we're working and we're lifting heavy cases in this little confined space, and it is what it is. And so we need to change some systems. We have it, we've got a few ideas up our sleeves, but we cannot, by USDA regulation, pay for a new building. So that would have to be a bond issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Last time we looked at this years and years ago, before I was even here, I think a new building was 28
The district would have to
million.
pay for
Well, thank you. I mean, you cleared that up, because there was, you made sense, but the numbers didn't add up, and I understand where you're going at, and it makes total sense to me now, and I appreciate you putting up with me.
No problem.
I have a question about the CEP dropping, because that's one of my concerns. To go from 22,000 that were eligible a few years ago, 16, 17, to 15,000 now, that's a significant drop. And that CEP is what drives, or it's ISP, the ISP, sorry, I was calling it the wrong thing. The ISP is what drives everybody can get free meals, correct?
That's correct.
Because we're talking about an apples and an orange system. The ISP system drives off of that. The
Direct
CEP
certification.
drives off the ISP. Too many letters. But, and that is dropping, correct? What we have now, free and reduced lunch, comes off of parents filling it out and giving it to us and so on. And are we seeing that same kind of drop with free and reduced lunch?
No, it's been pretty stable over the last 5 years. I mean, we've been, I would say, between 73 and 78% free and
Okay.
reduced over the
And-
last 5
and
years.
am I correct in saying, because my brain tells me, we have a policy that you can't go in the red, but that's not true everywhere. Some school districts supplement their food program, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm sure there are some.
Yeah. And so, you know, you have been very efficient for us for a long time, and we haven't had to worry about that. But
Those schools that do go into the red, they're looking for a food service management company to run their operation.
they're outsourcing it?
Yeah,
Well,
that
we don't
might
wanna
be
go
one
there.
reason why they would look for a food service management company.
Okay. Yeah, there's two things that have been said that we don't want to go. One is we don't want to go there, and the other is we don't want to talk about bonds for new buildings for food. But we got to figure out what we
Okay.
do.
I like that.
Okay.
Should we write that
Ernestine?
Mike was talking about that 10% that's, they're too poor to be able to pay for their own, but because of changes of laws and things, they no longer qualify for the free or reduced lunch. I don't want to advertise this too much, but quite frankly, we never let any kid go without lunch, do we?
No.
We do not let any child in our district miss lunch or miss food.
Absolutely not.
Okay, just wanted to, that's what had happened to those 10%, Mike. We'd feed them.
Okay.
Right.
All right, so we're
Sorry
on
to interrupt your
benefits.
presentation. Keep
Let's
going.
talk a little bit about benefits of CEP. It could lessen the administrative burden to collect, approve, and verify applications. We could have a whole nother discussion about verifying applications, but it is a pain, it is a game. But we'll save that for the next board meeting or sometime after that. Potential simplification of counting and claiming of meals at the point of service. Increased participation potentially, especially at breakfast. We see that most of our kids, especially in the elementary schools, such a good percentage are eating lunch right now. But we've been working hard to try to reduce that gap between lunch participation and breakfast participation. Lack of risk. Each year of the 4-year cycle, the school district or schools may use the ISP from the first year or the current ISP, whichever is higher. Please note that this lack of risk would be for nutrition services, not necessarily the district as a whole, and I think that Fabian's going to talk more about that later. Eliminates or drastically reduces unpaid meal balances and collection efforts. Reduces financial burden for all parents and guardians to provide food for their children during the school day. And so now Fabian is going to talk to you about some potential implementation challenges.
So we talked a lot about the positive sides and, you know, why aren't we doing CEP? Because that's a question we often get. There are some risks, and those risks could have negative financial impact on other sources of funding that we receive, funding that often directly supports instruction in the academic focus of some of our highest needs. And part of this is because we are, through providing poverty data, we receive funds for at-risk and E-rate, and without the, and we pull that information currently from our free and reduced meal applications or our meal benefits forms. Without collecting those forms, we need another way to collect that information for us to be able to report it to the state and for us to continue to receive those at-risk dollars. Those dollars are for every single student that meets the at-risk criteria, could be up to $2,600. And so again, currently a motivating factor for our families to complete that free and reduced meal application is the fact that they're gonna get meal benefits. They'll get a free meal or a reduced meal. Under this new system, they're gonna get free meals regardless. So what motivating factor do they have to complete this home income survey that we would need in order for us to be able to submit that information to the state so that we can receive those at-risk dollars? And again, at $2,600 a form per student, you know, 23 kids don't fill out that application, that's $60,000. I mean, that could be a teacher. And so often, again, these are monies that some of our highest poverty, highest need schools are receiving. Again, there are also some technical challenges tied to this. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
There are some technical challenges that are tied to this. First of all, the collection of the form, this new form that we would need to be required to do, nutrition services cannot process it. So we would need to find a mechanism to be able to process that form so that we can pull out the data and submit it to the state. There's also some staff training that's involved, not only in the nutrition services department, but also with our schools, with our office staff, because again, no longer, this changes the whole process of how they currently operate. The enrollment process will need to change, and this is something that we're currently working with our new CIO, who's bringing in a new perspective, and we're hoping that through his insight and through his ideas, we'll be able to mitigate some of the potential challenges that we may have in terms of collecting the application by making it part of the enrollment information that parents fill out as part of online enrollment and making it a requirement. Student mobility is a huge factor. Again, we would not be able to go CEP district-wide just based on current direct certifications. So when you talk about a high mobile school district like ours, let's say you have a school that qualifies for CEP, you have students that have been going there kindergarten through whenever, and then all of a sudden they move to another school that isn't CEP. And then all of a sudden we're charging them for their meals, or they need to complete a free and reduced meal application. So I think mobility is a huge factor for us as we look at it, because we are a highly mobile district. The food production center and its capacity, David talked about when it was built, and what it was built for, and now we're doing 50,000 meals. If we were to increase the need for many more meals, we would not be able to do it under our current infrastructure. And so I think that's another big concern as we move forward. And lastly, program sustainability. David talked about the fact that there's some chatter out there about the government changing and making more stringent the qualification standards for you to qualify for meal benefits. So SNAP in particular. So if they make that process more stringent, that means that less families will qualify for SNAP benefits. So that, again, is less kids that we can directly certify. So again, that sustainability piece as we move forward is certainly a concern, because and a lot of districts are facing some of this right now, where they implemented CEP 4 years ago, and now, because the trend that we're seeing in terms of direct certification rates going down is not unique to us, it's not unique to Kansas, it's a trend. And so there are some districts right now that are facing the decision of how do we move forward, because those schools don't qualify for CEP. So as we talked about these challenges, we talked about the benefits. We understand the need for us to kind of move forward and test this. So our recommendation is for us to commit ourselves to pilot CEP at 2 schools, 2 elementary schools for next school year. This gives us enough time to work through the enrollment process with IST and some of our other departments to identify potential challenges and figure out how to mitigate some of the concerns. Again, I think Rob's idea of being able to make the collection of this information that we need as part of the online enrollment process is great and could allow us to, again, reduce the amount of forms that we would need to go out and chase. This also gives us the opportunity to assess impact to at-risk funds on a smaller level, so be able to identify if there's a negative impact, what negative impact there is, or if there's a positive impact. It also gives us the opportunity to assess mobility, because we'll be able to track these students at the schools that we select. So we'll be able to follow those kids as they enroll elsewhere and identify, did they fill out a free and reduced meal application wherever they went? Are they receiving free benefits, or are they incurring debt? So I think this gives us an opportunity to be able to pilot this in a controlled environment. It'll also give us the opportunity to look at participation rates. So if breakfast or lunch participation increased, but by what rates did it increase, which then allows us to survey impact to our food production center at the school service center and identify whether we can continue to grow it in that manner. So again, that is our commitment as we move forward. Over the next couple of months, we'll work on identifying the 2 schools. We have narrowed down our list to a handful of them. We want to make sure to meet individually with those building principals, be able to discuss this with their office staff, because we need them to be on board. And we need them to understand that this is going to require a change in processes, in the way that they do enrollment, in the way that they deal with students entering their building and exiting their building. It gives us enough time to also educate those families on potential processes. So that is all that we have for you this evening. Any additional questions?
Yes, Dan?
Thank you. So if I had to summarize this presentation, I came up with 4 points.
Good luck.
Well, I think I did it. I think I may have. Yeah, let's see how close I am. Number 1, we're committed to making sure every kid is fed, whether it's through CEP or the traditional free and reduced. Every kid's going to get fed. Secondly, we're going to assure that there's no shaming for food insecurity, or even if you just don't want to pay. There's going to be no food shaming for the kid. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, we want to increase all our alternative food offerings, whether it's breakfast or snacks or fresh fruit. And 4, we want to do a pilot at 2 schools in order to gather information on what the net increase or decrease in revenues and net dollars would be for the district if we went to a CEP program. Is that a good summary?
I'm a little iffy on number 3.
Just say yes. I want those Star Wars tickets. Come on.
We're committed to increasing alternative food offerings.
That term about alternative really applies in our world to breakfast.
Okay.
It's the expansion of those breakfast.
Well, what
But we're going to make the fresh fruit and vegetable program as cool as we can and bring in stuff that we
that's
just
actually
don't
good.
eat every day.
So that's actually a good point. So when we use the term alternative food offering, we are talking about the breakfast program.
Yeah, if you look at our lunch program and you look at participation rates at lunch, we are really high. It's our breakfast where we've been increasing, and there's an opportunity for additional greater growth there.
But we're doing alternative serving methods and have been for quite some time for lunch too. So we have carts. We take the food to where the kids congregate.
Right.
They don't all want to come to the cafeteria. The lines might be long on some days, and so it's just a different approach to, we're gonna bring the food to you.
What,
Effortless.
how close am I in my number 4 on we want these pilot programs to give us more information on future costs or future savings by using traditional versus CEP?
That is correct.
Good
We'll be,
statement.
yeah,
I
we'll
like
be,
that.
yeah.
You like that?
Yeah, we'll be able to assess some of that, and then we can come back to
That's
you at
pretty
a
good.
later date once we identify what we realize the impact is on whether we want to continue expanding or just we'll come to a decision point at that point.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ben?
Great job.
Thanks.
So I had kind of 2 statements and 2 questions. I know, right? Yeah. So the first thing is last week a lot of us went to various sites. I didn't get to go up to the northwest side of town, but southeast is only a 10-minute drive from work for me. So I met up with Jeff, secondary services supervisor, and ate lunch at Southeast last week, and it was really good. It was tremendously better than anything I would have packed for my own lunch. And
Thank you for the vote.
and at the same time, it's adult full meal lunch price is what, $3.75? You can't get a lunch for $3.75 anywhere else.
You're right.
So I'm calling out, staff, our school staff. I got a little bit of anecdotal data that our school staff doesn't necessarily participate in eating our lunches. Put money on your account. Have the meal. Have the lunch. You could grab it and go and do what you need to do on the rest of your lunch break. But yeah, I had it and it was really good. And I will probably, just like Wendy mentioned, I will probably take the advantage of driving over to Southeast more often now, for sure, because the lunch I pack is not great.
And the offer stands for all of you. If you ever want to go out and just meet us out for lunch, you're more than welcome to. So.
Yep. The second thing is, so my kiddo is in pre-K now, and so he participates in the pre-K snack program, and so every day I ask him, guy, little guy, what was for snack? And he says, I don't know, and because kids in school, they don't do anything at school, So of course, so all of
really
our
quickly,
right. So all of our menus are published. You can go to wps.yumyummy.com and you can see nutrition facts, information, all that sort of stuff for all of our school sites. And so I kind of did the millennial parenting thing and kind of snuck around and found out what he was having for snack each day. And I was like, so how was that? How was that, string cheese and milk that you had, And he's like, how did you know? And then, but the other day, I asked him, if he had snack, and he says, yes, I had sunflower seeds. And I looked at my wife and I was like, have we ever given him sunflower seeds before? And we hadn't. It was the very first time that he had ever had sunflower seeds, and it was because of pre-K snack, and he, on his own, decided that he was going to have sunflower seeds that day. So kudos to the nutrition services for providing a unique food that my kiddo had never had before, and I'm sure he'll continue to explore new foods as the year goes on.
Did he enjoy said sunflower seeds?
He did. He asked for more at home, and so we have to scramble and find some. So my two questions are, so because of our mobility in our students across the district, typically our meal benefits applications are done at the beginning of the year. But say, for example, a family's income varies throughout, week to week, month to month, like a lot of people's income varies. Can they fill out a meal application? Okay, this is kind of a loaded question. Can they fill out a meal application if their income dips underneath the threshold at any time?
Yep. You can reapply at any time during the course of the school year.
Okay, so families watching out there can reapply at any time for free and reduced lunches. Okay, that's good to know. And also, it kind of dovetails to the Yum Yummy. You mentioned that our menus for our fresh fruit and vegetable program are at 30-some sites. Is there a way our public out there could look up the unique kinds of fruits and vegetables on those menus on, say, Yum Yummy?
Great idea.
We'll work on that.
The answer is
We'll get it
no,
out
but
there.
we'll work on
Yeah,
that.
we'll get it done. Great call.
Thank you.
Mike?
You've alluded to several times the balance, the children that don't have money in their accounts that are still getting meals. And we've already said that we're getting them meals. What is that balance, what, district-wide, that, or broad number, I'm sure you don't have it right down in the nickel,
Approximately $200,000.
200,000?
That was at the end of last year, and that's delinquent debt. Some of that turned into bad debt, maybe about 10,000. And so it went from 200 to 190, and then, but we've incurred some additional, through in the month of August and September.
So about $250,000 we're owed for lunches, that $3.65 a lunch. That's a bunch of lunches.
Yep.
Yeah. So And I'm glad that we're taking care of these kids, because that's what we're here to do, is take care of kids. I just think that's an important number to know, because
It's big.
that's something that's hurting us in the end, and it's not a good thing, but we're making it a good thing, and I appreciate that, so, thank you.
Okay, I want to thank you for this presentation, because CEP and what the district could, should, might do has kind of been floating for a while. And I'm glad that we are looking at this strategically, starting with 2 schools, beginning to figure out, because we kind of know what our challenges are, but until we put it into place, we're not going to really know. So with starting with 2, we're going to understand what our challenges are, and then be able to select the next round with a whole lot more knowledge than we have right now.
That's
that correct?
That's correct. And if we build the infrastructure through our enrollment process, it'll be something that we can hopefully easily replicate as we look towards expansion.
And we can work through the whole issue of, I'm at school A now and I get a free lunch, I move to school B and I don't get a free lunch, and I have to fill out paperwork that I didn't have to fill out before, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, and we're talking about doing that, whether we send them from school A where they get a free lunch with a meal benefits application that they can turn into their next school. So we're looking at ways that we can effectively be able to manage some of that.
And
piece.
all of those things are the pieces that we're gonna try to figure out in our pilot.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes me feel good, because I think there is a place for this in our district. I don't know if it's district-wide, and I'm not saying that for any reason other than I don't know. But I think we're gonna get answers with this pilot, and that's gonna help us. So I appreciate your doing that. I appreciate you doing the work to expand our breakfast programs and have options for our kids, because we do know that our kids cannot function if they don't eat. And we have got to figure